Welcome to the Pitchwerks podcast. I'm Scott McTaggart. Over the last 20 years, I've been a sales rep, a marketer, a manager, an executive, a consultant, and an advisor. This show is designed to give you access to my list of contacts so that you can learn more about how to present your ideas at work and succeed in your career.
Startups and salespeople, marketers and managers from the Epicast Network in Pittsburgh. It's the Pitchwerks podcast.
It is the most transparent place to be because you're never trying to hide the fact that you do have an agenda, that you're representing a particular interest. But to be successful, you have to find the win-win.
Yes.
You have to think about that audience and what they need and where that intersects with what message we're trying to deliver.
Howdy there, Pitchworkers. It is Wednesday. This is Scott. That makes this the Pitchwerks podcast, I'm hoping, because if it's not, then I'm in the wrong studio. This week, we've got Susan English. She's the Senior Vice President over at Gatesman Agency, which is just a really cool shop. You're going to find out. I guarantee you, we're going to talk about who some of their clients are. We're going to pack a lot of facts into this. I've been setting this show up for a while. And if you can, just browse through some of their stuff and you'll see what I'm talking about. This is an agency that is just making stuff happen. Before we jump into the interview with Susan, though, we got to talk a little bit about ratings and reviews. If you have been listening to the show for any length of time and you haven't rated and reviewed it in iTunes, I would really appreciate it if you would. If, on the other hand, this is the first time you're hearing it, please subscribe. Every week we talk about sales, marketing, and startups. Hopefully, you find a way to sharpen your tools and have a little bit of fun while we're at it. So yeah, let's talk about Susan. Let's talk about PR, social media, whatever it is about messaging, getting your word out. It's going to come up a little bit in this conversation. All right, so here we go with the interview part of the show. Susan English, Senior, I almost sold you short like 10 seconds into the show. Senior Vice President over at Gatesman, Director of PR and Social Media. Do I have all that right?
You do. You got it right.
I am so glad you came in, and I know that your schedule is super jammed, so that makes it even more meaningful to me. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Happy to be here.
Well, so we got a lot to cover, right? And let me start with what I told you when we first started talking. I do not bring agency people into the fortress of solitude here, okay? And that's nothing against the people that work in your profession. It is just the fact that I have to be very sparing with it, right? There are a lot of people that are in the message business, and I am very tentative to become an infomercial, right? I don't want that problem. But credit where it's due. Gatesman is killing it lately. And one of the things, I think I told you this when we first met, I love the fact that you take it in stride. I've seen some of the brands that you've done press releases about having, won the account and whatnot. And there's never any pat myself on the back, ticker tape parade, or aren't we awesome? It's all low key. It's all act like you've been there before. And I hope you take that compliment because it's one of the highest ones I can give.
Absolutely. We'll take it. I think part of that comes from authenticity, which I think is a real differentiator for Gatesman and one of the reasons people like working with the people who work there.
Well, I was there in your office. I took the tour because I did. I just needed to see it, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I noticed, and I even sent it to you on the tour, the company viewpoint is not ever past arm's length. You can see good enough sucks right on the wall.
Yes,
right?
You can.
And it's a constant reminder of who we either are or who we aspire to be. Because if you're new, obviously you've got to get with the rest of the herd, right? What was the decision behind that? Is that a common thing in your business? Putting stuff on the wall like that.
Putting stuff on the wall. I think it just comes back down to the culture of the agency. And they're not afraid to be direct and to say what needs to be said to inspire their teams and therefore inspire the clients.
I think being direct is close cousins with being brief. And I think being brief is the soul of what I do, and I think what you do too, but don't let me speak for you on that. I've always found part of my job to be boiling 8 paragraphs down to 2 sentences.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time editing.
I love the diplomacy, and you put on your diplomacy face when you said it too. It was like, yes, we do. We definitely do a second draft here and there during the work day. So let's start with you. How did you end up in this?
Very early in my life, like a lot of people sort of think, okay, what do I want to do? I really want to make a difference, right?
Yeah.
That's a common calling. And, I was always sort of a achiever, hard worker, smart. So I said, I'll become a doctor. That's what all good people do.
Where are you living at this point?
In Houston, Texas. So
Very
I was
good.
born in Pittsburgh, but we moved to Houston when I was 3.
Okay.
So went to the University of Texas at Austin, and they encouraged you, if you were going to go for a medical degree, to major in something else. It made you more interesting to the medical schools. Yeah. And I'd also done some acting on the side. So I said, well, I'll do journalism. Why not? Learn a little bit about everything. And two things happened at once. One, I enjoyed the journalism and the learning aspect of it. But 2, every time I was learning something on the medical side, what it prompted me to do was say, more people should know about this. How do we get the word out? So I did go on and become a broadcast journalist. I worked in about 5 newsrooms across the state of Texas. And it was a great first career because you learn a lot. You learn how to sort of be relentless in your pursuit of information and never take no for an answer. Go through what may seem impossible. There's no I called and no one answered and I left a voicemail. That's not an acceptable response there, and later translated to PR.
I hope salespeople are listening too.
Yeah, pretty much. If you want to know how to be persistent, talk to a journalist. But I was starting to get frustrated that I would report on a story, but not always see progress against it. So I really wasn't getting to that ultimate motivation that I had, which was to make a difference. And meanwhile, my mother had moved back to Pittsburgh, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to make a change. And you don't jump from market 97 up to a top 20 market and be on air. So I thought, what am I qualified to do? And I decided to make the change to public relations. Certainly was told by my journalism colleagues that I was going to the dark side, but let me tell you how wrong they are.
How subtle.
Yeah, I know.
It's good to have friends that, lift you up and support your endeavors.
Yes, for sure. But in the end, I was the winner, because the truth is that it is the most transparent place to be, because you're never trying to hide the fact that you do have an agenda, that you're representing a particular interest. But to be successful, you have to find the win-win.
Yes.
You have to think about that audience and what they need and where that intersects with what message we're trying to deliver. So it was the ultimate win-win. Let's throw in a bonus. Whenever you're in public relations, if you are working with a sizable corporation, they also have something else that most people trying to make a difference don't have, and that is resources.
Yeah.
So once you realize that for your client to be successful, they need to get behind a cause or a message or provide information of value to an audience, and now you have the resources to do it right, you can really make a difference in multiple ways. So it's not the dark side at all. I love it.
I find such common feeling with you on this in a very specific way. I've told the story on the show before that, I was at the University of Pittsburgh in the marketing program, and I found that I just did not feel as though it was a good fit for me, or at least it was like what I thought it was going to be. And without a better plan, I said, I'm going to sell cars, which again is a dark side. What have you, what are you thinking
What'd
about?
What'd your friends say about that one?
Not nearly what they said to you. They didn't accuse me of being Darth Vader. I can promise you that. But they were like, this is kind of weird, isn't it? And I came to a similar conclusion as you did. Yours was a feeling, and don't let me speak for you if I'm wrong, but a feeling that there was an honesty in the fact that your agenda was like sort of being worn like a button.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Same thing with cars. It was the most honest job in the world.
I can see that.
You can sit there and say, I have a 2017 model XYZ, and I will sell it to you for this many dollars. And the customer says, no. If they say it's price, then you can tell them, we choose not to sell it less than that. Doesn't have to be a reason, doesn't have to be a story. We choose not to do anything deeper. And It's an interesting common thread that you find where in the quote unquote dark side, people find as long as everyone walks in educated, it's pretty liberating, in terms of honesty. There's a lot of sneak thieves out there in the world. Now, Gatesman, you were founded in what, 2006, 2005?
2006.
Yeah, but somebody there did a great job because 10 years ago or whatever, 11 years ago, I noticed and I registered the fact that there was a firm in town doing things that I had interest in that I'd never heard of before. Now, again, 11 years on, you said the messaging is direct, you're very blunt or whatever, but there has to be more to it than that. What's behind the success that you've had so far?
Well, the non-spun answer.
The non-spun answer.
I think is common sense.
I'm a big fan.
Yes. You speak to anyone in leadership at Gatesman and they just get right down to it and say, this is what you need to be a successful business. And they aren't afraid to pivot. They aren't afraid to change. Mm-hmm. So right now, the big shift that Gatesman has made that potentially a lot of other agencies haven't is this understanding that the consumer rules, or whoever the audience is, let's just call them the consumer. Gone are the days when the agency's role is to help the brand sort of decide what it wants to be and then develop the marketing to push that message through to the audience.
Can I restate that to see if you agree with me really quickly?
Sure.
It feels like what you're saying, and I think we're really tightly aligned on this. In the old days, someone used to suggest an identity to a company. And now it's more about uncovering an identity of a company.
It's uncovering an identity of the company, but in the context of who they're trying to reach. So if you think about how cluttered marketing has become and how hard it is to cut through that, in order to have a chance of succeeding, of a true, authentic connection between a brand and their target, we start with the target. Right. They're the hero.
Which is the common sense angle you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't happen because there are already agendas, there's already preconceived ideas of what the brand should be. And I think Gatesman is brave enough to say, if you want to engage with us, we're going to challenge you. And we're going to start with this consumer. We're going to do tons of research. Gatesman is incredibly committed to research. As a matter of fact, the agency invests more than $200,000 a year into different research tools that are not billed back to the client. Research is often a barrier for clients. They say first thing to go from the budget, but how can you have an informed strategy without it?
The research comes out first.
Research comes out first.
No one's ever told me that before. But you used a verb in there that is potentially prickly. You said challenge, right? Mm-hmm. I'm on record with a number of people, some of whom really didn't want to hear it, that the customer is not always right? And in this case, I'm talking about the relationship between you and a company whose message you would help them craft, right? Sometimes, I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know, a consultant's job is to be referee. Come into the room and see if this vice president or that vice president is correct as they duke it out in the Coliseum before the president, right? But when you say the word challenge, what I hear is the customer may not be right and you still have to find a way to land on your feet. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Do you get thrown out ever? You ever have somebody really not take it well?
We do. Yeah. We do. But it's not, the challenge isn't as, it doesn't come across as harsh as it may sound at first, because the challenge does take into consideration the point of the view of the client. They know the category, they know where they're coming from. So that is a consideration that goes into the rest of the insights that we're gathering. And I think that the real key is taking that client along the journey of why we arrived at the conclusion we did. Right. So you start with the situation. You start by talking about the customer that they're trying to target. You get a lot of head nodding and understanding, and they maybe can even contribute to that process. Then you pull out what you think the key insights are. You go ahead and you test those. Now we have buy-in on what the insights are. So by the time we get to how we need to adapt our messaging to intersect with the insights, the client's already there.
I often use Steve Jobs as an example when we talk about these kinds of things, because I think everybody saw Steve Jobs as the person who gave the customer the middle finger and still had success, right?
Right.
He didn't ask you what you wanted. He told you what you were going to want and then just delivered it sooner than you actually realized you wanted it, right? Another one of the quotes that's found its way into a couple of these episodes is, the Henry Ford one, where he said, if I asked the customer what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? And I think it's super dangerous in that self-delusion category of dangerous, right? Where people just say, well, I'm the visionary, you're the client, and you made a distinction that with your earlier point and then with this point you just made, that you're making sure you're justifying it with research. You invested company profits in research, and then you went further and had challenging, I'll use your word, challenging conversations, but at least they're backed by research. When a company starts out with an agency, what's the first thing? And I realize that, all companies are different and all their needs are different, but what is typically the first thing that they should be looking to buy from you?
I'd love for them to step back and have us provide perspective on their messaging.
Okay.
Because messaging is at the core of everything that they do. And we often do build that in. Let's say a client comes to us and says, I want you to do media relations, pitching, and, maybe we agree that it'll be like a certain amount a month.
I didn't just drop my iPad. I have no idea what you're talking about.
We often will say, hey, can we convert that first month into an investment period where we do some research, maybe we do some workshopping, we put together a message architecture that we think is going to strengthen our efforts down the road. And they're pretty receptive to that.
It doesn't matter how good the visuals are if the message sucks.
I do agree with you on that.
I wanted to be the one to say it because I mean, you're making a point very articulately, and driving it home, I think, is key to everybody. The first thing you have to start with is, what are we saying? The mission is not to put something on TV. The mission is to put a message out there that people will understand why we're even trying to communicate in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And this is very much in alignment with Gatesman approach, is when we look at that consumer to try and figure out the right messaging, we're also looking at what media they consume, what types of things appeal to them. Because remember, you still need that step of cutting through the clutter before they're going to hear the message. So a really great example is for our Thornton's client. They're a convenience store chain in the Midwest.
Okay.
And they were trying to move from being a convenience store to more of a quick food destination, kind of like a Sheetz.
Right.
And they had renovated a lot of their stores to actually include a kitchen. And our challenge was, how do we introduce this to folks? So we started and we looked at their customer. So in this case, primarily the millennial male. They were the right target to transfer because they didn't have as much aversion to eating at a convenience store.
Transfer from what?
From just filling up and leaving,
Got it.
thinking of it as a convenience store versus thinking of it a place where they could stop and get some food. So what did we do? We dove in. We watched them. We watched their behavior. So they came to the pump and they were scrolling through Snapchat. We profiled them in terms of what types of content was sticky. It was humorous. So our campaign, in addition to multiple levels, included a ton of humorous social content and humorous filters on Snapchat. So when these millennial males are sitting at the pump, swiping through, we got them with our message and drove them more inside the stores for sampling.
That's really cool. Every last bit of it, including the bit where it sounds like you had people on site actually observing, where I think a lot of people think that sounds a lot like work. Right? Let's not do that bit. That seems like work. And I think if the rubber doesn't ever meet the road, then how can you expect?
And there's also two parts to that. So some agencies are research-based, but it's sort of hands-off research. It's let's pull from this database, let's pull from that database. And I feel that Gatesman takes a good approach where they do all of that. They gather all that research, but then they reality check it in the real world with things like these, observational periods,
right,
where they go in and actually watch consumers in the environment and see what they do. That's it's not statistically significant, and with a lot of people that are research driven, it can be discounted.
I think you can argue anything though if you want to.
Probably
right? On that subject, yeah. You're talking about how many people could you possibly observe at these Thornton's locations?
But there are just subtleties to what the human mind will pull out of a situation that setting the right search parameters doesn't always get you there.
That's really cool. Now, this is the part where I had difficulty in the quote unquote marketing track over at Pitt, right? Was that I was more interested in writing the message maybe than identifying and having those statistical arguments, which is what I was kind of being groomed for, right? Like, let's have a statistical argument about what age group that person is in and whether or not they are representative of who would come to a Thornton's, who would go inside and eat at a Thornton, right? I wanted to be the person, the copywriter. I wanted to actually work on message, right? How do you handle that? Is that something where you've got specialists that are working on it, or is that also a statistical kind of a thing where you're just kind of throwing all the noodles at the wall and then testing them out? It seems longer if it's try a lot and test.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an approach a lot of agencies take is a lot of message testing. And I mean, it is a way to sort through things, but we want to step back and make sure that we make an emotional connection as well. And I think a great example would be for our StarKiss client. We do their social media.
Congratulations on just being able to drop that name, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Thank you. They're an awesome brand. It's an honor to work with them. It really is. And when we first worked with them, they're doing, a lot of things right, absolutely amazing. But they were really focused on the convenience message, which makes sense for their product. Tuna is particularly in the little pouches. And what our analysis showed was to connect with the customer. It just needed to take a step further to relate to them emotionally.
Okay.
So, convenience is a functional benefit, and we still want that. But emotional really got to this broader definition of hunger. Everyone's hungry to do more. We have less, but you want to do more. And
Yes.
this constant conflict, whether you're, a mom, a dad, millennial on the go. So the theme that we came up with was the sort of what's your hunger concept. And the social content streams falling out of that were a lot more relatable, motivational Mondays. And when we worked with a spokesperson, in this case, Candace Cameron,
Right, yeah.
it was more about her life and relating to some of those struggles. So just added this emotional component to complement the functional. So I would just say that in the message development, you have to go a step further that way and think about that emotional connection as well.
I've always tried to, when I do it, I try to work that in, but I'm one person, right? I mean, I could, if we were all in the same room, right? Obviously I can't compete with a Gatesman crew, right? In terms of that writing. So I've always tried to basically keep it simple, strike an emotional chord, and also bring out the best in people. That's always been sort of, my message has always had to be aspirational, right? Even when a brand necessarily doesn't want to be high road, right? I find a way to squeeze a little bit of that high road juice out just because that's who I prefer to be associated with. And I think you're filing that under the same heading. When you get into the art side of it though, too, right? The art is also part of the message. And I don't mean even necessarily visual art. Sometimes it could be the song. Sometimes it just, there's so much real complex creative that goes into that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that all works its way into the final product? Well,
so we do have an entire creative department, and I don't know if I have insight because each person has a different process that they follow. I don't know that there's any one winning formula. I would say that those choices that may seem like they're just art are usually based in some form of research or understanding of the target as well.
I don't doubt that at all, right? But sometimes you use, say, licensed music, right? That, I think, probably falls into that research piece.
Right.
But then there's the other piece where it's like, well, we would like this to be piano. We would like a brand new piano riff to be played. And someone goes into the room and says, do you like this one? Or do you like it? I don't know. I've always been curious about, the complexity of certain types of art being worked into commercial messaging.
I don't know if this answers your question specifically, but one point that I think is important to make is that and no one really wants to admit this because everything is about this research and the process. But in order to connect with a human, you have to think like a human. So if it's something that speaks to you and you've immersed yourself in their audience, there's a certain amount of judgment that just comes in there.
Yep.
And you, our tagline is hacking human behavior. And it really is about understanding what's going to appeal to our target and what's going to motivate them to move. And, these things tend to actually be pretty universal.
Yeah.
You think about very broad concepts like wanting to conform or wanting to stand out.
That's why I picked the aspirational thing, because everyone wants to be the good guy in the story. They want to be the hero, not the villain. And that's one of the reasons why, it's integrated to who I am too, but it just made sense to me. Who doesn't want to be the hero of the movie?
Picking a platform that is going to have widespread appeal.
Right.
And for you, for where you are with your audience, that's a safe place to go.
Absolutely.
If you were digging down and wanted to motivate a particular group, you may pick a different motivator that you're able to identify works very well specifically with them. I think your choices make a ton of sense for where you are.
I always say with when TV went to anti-heroes, right? So think about the first person to pitch, whether it was Breaking Bad or some show that didn't make it, that could have been Breaking Bad, right? So tell us about the protagonist in your show. Well, he makes meth. But it's okay because he does it to pay for cancer treatments and take care of his family. And they're sitting there, and I just envision these horrified faces around a boardroom going, I'm sorry, it sounded a lot like you said the main character sells methamphetamine, right? That's a huge, daring jump. But it does follow one of the other cardinal rules, which is to differentiate and stand apart.
Right.
So on the one hand, I kind of identify with that. On the other, I would have been one of the people in that boardroom saying, don't make that show.
Yeah, but deep down, wouldn't you want to find out what happened in that story?
Yes. And no, that was a great show. It was one of the greatest shows ever. I just wasn't sure if I was going to have to make the decision about the money, right? Like, are we going to fund this thing? Like, advertisers aren't going to call us and say,
take a chance.
Hey, put me on the meth show, right? Put me on the horrible show with the terrible addictions, right? No one says that sentence.
Yeah. What's funny, you asked earlier about the testing method. And even though I wouldn't say we're one of those shops that, comes up with the exact storyboard and goes out to different panels. And I'm sure we can do that, but most of our clients wouldn't have the budget, I think, to move that way. But look at the freedom that digital advertising and social media have given us to test different concepts. So for your Breaking Bad analogy, if you were concerned whether this was going to go over well or not, you can create little short storylines, little short concepts, and we can see on the analytics side what's resonating and what isn't, and we can adjust.
That's actually super useful for a smaller business too, to think that way. So I appreciate that nugget. How long have you been involved with commercial clients now? You yourself?
I've worked in the agency setting now for 18 years.
Okay. So, that's perfect for the question I'll ask next then. Is the timeline getting shorter between when they come to you and when they want deliverables?
I think it depends on the client and the industry. Everything moves so much faster that it's the situation that they're facing. Particularly in the PR and social realm,
right?
You have to be able to adapt and change on a dime. So the world is moving faster, so the deadlines are faster. Think about a content generation strategy. So if your client is wanting to produce thought leadership on a particular topic, they put out some content related to that. Meanwhile, they're producing other pieces that they plan to use long term. If they're getting feedback through those social channels that, wait, maybe this isn't resonating, or if we tweak it this way, it will be stronger,
right,
then they're pivoting on the larger pieces as well. And it's important that an agency can adjust and instead of seeing it as a barrier, say, hey, we're going to have a stronger product.
I actually asked the question not just as sort of social commentary, which is interesting on its own, but honestly from a staffing perspective, right? If a client says, I want this overnight, that means I need a lot more people. It's just, there's no getting around it. Whether I subcontract it or I hire more people is the only thing I've got sort of to play with, right? But done faster means need more people. Need more people means paid up front. It means, I don't know, we need more clients. You just have to make it up on volume is the old saying, right? You know, where you say like, okay, well, if we're going to hire a bunch of extra people so that we can be the overnight turnaround company, right? There are risks involved with all of this. And it just feels like this is probably the highest risk, highest stakes time to be in this business to this point. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I think there's a lot of challenges with staffing appropriately for the types of projects that we have. I will say that Gatesman, because of the very deep relationships we develop with our clients, we're fortunate that they are looking at us as a partner to help them with their long-term planning.
Yeah.
So there is a certain amount of stability that's a base. And then back to that common sense element, I would say that the leadership is really smart in that they don't staff so lean that we don't have capacity.
Right.
They are planning for the future. You know, when you're an agency that's experienced an average of 30% growth a year.
Wow, congratulations. That's a great number.
Thank you. You have to bank on that growth, and you have to plan ahead for that growth so that we can continue to do the best work for our clients.
I do. I watch people go skinny, then fat, then skinny, then fat. They lose the people that they really wanted to keep because they couldn't. The better people will hold out for stability. So you go skinny, fat, and then the next thing you know, it's like, well, I've got a bunch of people who I wouldn't want to go to war with, but at least there's a lot of them. And I hate that strategy. No disrespect to people who are just trying to, make a living, but the more people want fast delivery, the more staffing becomes the most important issue. How many people do you have now? Ballpark, not exact.
In Pittsburgh, I think it's between 70 and 80. And in, we have our Chicago and Springfield office as well. So I think total the agency is between 120 and 130, but.
Yeah, it's not as big as I thought, actually. When you said 30, all of a sudden my mind ran away with me.
Well, remember, we started at zero.
Well, yeah.
Because it's a brand new company.
Yeah, I get it. But the growth number is super impressive. And I guess I just connected that to a much larger number. No, that's actually very workable, for where you're at. That's great news, actually. I was wondering where you were storing all those people after taking the tour. I was like, I don't know if there's room for all the people I've imagined work here. I wish I could go on for 2 more hours. I've learned a ton just from sitting here talking to you, and that I thank you for. Susan English from Gatesman down on the south side. Actually, you guys are moving. Where are you moving to?
We're going to be downtown. We'll be in Gateway Center.
Down in Gateway Center. You got to love the Sydney Street location. It's very pretty. I was there.
It is.
I hope you guys have just as good decorators at the new place as you have at the one you're moving out of.
I've heard it's going to be amazing. So,
Susan, thank you for coming in.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's all the time we have for this week. But boy, it was really tempting to keep on going. Susan really jammed a lot in, and I learned a ton this week, which... No disrespect. I honestly just didn't expect to learn as much as I did. It was a really, really informative conversation, and I all of a sudden looked at my clock and realized we had to wind down. We're going to get back into the lab, make another one of these shows for you. I would expect that will probably be out next week on, say, Wednesday. So if you want, a little bit more Pitchwerks in the meantime, hit us up on social media or the website. Just, use that brand, Pitchwerks, Pitchwerks. Otherwise, just hold your horses. We'll be back, and there'll be a new show and something new to sink your teeth into. I hope you enjoy it.
The Pitchwerks podcast comes to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a production of the Epicast Network and McTaggart, LLC. Engineering and production by Buzzy Torek and Nick Miller. For more information, show feedback, and ad sales, visit pitchwerks.com. Pitchwerks.com. On social media, find and follow the show on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram using that same brand name, Pitchwerks.